These shocking historical photos have been published recently. Write your opinion about these photos in the comments. In December 1994, Chechen women gathered near Grozny and prayed in the open cold as Russian forces moved toward the city. Their raised hands show a quiet last appeal before the First Chechen War turned Grozny into one of the most watched cities in the world. In February 1959, this Dyatlov Pass team member rested inside a snow shelter during the group's climb through the northern Ural Mountains. Days later, the camp was found empty, leaving a case that became one of the Soviet Union's most studied mountain mysteries. Around 1973, farm workers in Kherson Oblast sat for lunch in the open field while combine harvesters waited behind them. The table shows a Soviet harvest custom where food, work, and machinery met in the same place during the busiest days of the grain season. On June 21, 1971, archaeologists in Ukraine uncovered the Scythian gold pectoral in the Tovsta Mohila mound, a piece made more than 2,000 years earlier. Its tiny animals, riders, and plant details turned a field dig into one of the greatest ancient gold finds of the Soviet era. On January 18, 1978, the Hartford Civic Center roof fell in only hours after almost 4,700 fans had watched a basketball game under it. Snow and ice exposed hidden design problems, and the empty arena became a famous engineering failure with no one hurt. On June 20, 1944, United States soldiers rested outside a small French cafe after moving inland from the Normandy beaches. The cafe sign and tired faces capture the quiet minutes between orders, road dust, and the long push toward Paris. On June 20, 1944, the Japanese carrier Zuikaku turned hard during the Battle of the Philippine Sea as United States Navy aircraft closed in from above. The white circles on the water show tight evasive turns, and Zuikaku was hit several times but stayed afloat after the raid. This Focke-Wulf 190A5 was found in a forest in Leningrad Oblast in 1989 after serving with Jagdgeschwader 54, the Luftwaffe unit known as the Green Heart. Its faded paint and clear markings made the aircraft look like a rare forest time capsule from the Eastern Front. In 1893, the woman at the center of the famous Fall River case was found not guilty after the jury deliberated for only 90 minutes. She stayed in the same city for the rest of her life, living with a verdict that cleared her, but never stopped the whispers. Born in Buffalo in 1906, Ida, Iva, and Eva Hanna were identical triplets who became the Hanna Triplets, a singing and dancing act in American show life. As babies, they wore red, white, and blue ribbons so people could tell them apart, and by age 5 they were performing with Ringling Brothers Circus. In July 1945, a 14-year-old Okinawan boy, mobilized by Japanese forces, stood beside a much taller United States Marine. He was part of the Iron and Blood Imperial Corps, a group of Okinawan schoolboys drawn into the final months of the Pacific Campaign. After she sang at a birthday gathering in 1942, guard Franz Wunsch singled out Helena Citronova and used his position to protect her inside Auschwitz. That strange bond later helped her sister survive too, making their story one of the most unsettling survival accounts linked to the camp. Alice Vance, also known as Alice Bounds, was a sideshow performer with a rare form of dwarfism who became known in both Europe and the United States. This photo is unusual because she is shown in a staged costume, while rarer portraits show her in regular clothes beside her mother. This may show the French Licorne atmospheric test on July 3, 1970, rising above a Pacific testing site with its strange cap shaped by high heat and wind. The image is debated because the angle differs from the famous Licorne view, making it one of the more mysterious frames from France's 1970 test year. In 2003, an Afghan militia member lay beside United States Marines while holding a rare Type 1 Kalashnikov, one of the earliest versions made after the Second World War. The old wooden rifle beside modern Marine gear shows how Cold War-era equipment was still active in Afghanistan decades later. On September 11, 2001, a firefighter was filmed running through a New York tunnel toward the World Trade Center while many people were moving away. Years later, his family recognized the blurry frame as one of his final known appearances, turning a few seconds of footage into a lasting record of duty. In 1939, Mr. Dougherty stood with a child and a farm dog in Malheur County, Oregon, during the hard rural years of the Great Depression. The worn boots, rough shelter, and relaxed smiles show a family moment that feels warmer than the dry land around them. This aerial view shows the former Unit 731 site in Manchuria, where Japan ran one of the most secret research programs of the Second World War. After 1945, key records were exchanged for immunity, turning the compound into a chilling example of evidence traded behind closed doors. During the Battle of Baguio in 1945, a Japanese soldier stepped out to surrender as soldiers of the United States 33rd Infantry Division moved through the trees. The scene shows a rare quiet moment in the Philippines campaign, with one man walking into view along the Nagilian Road after weeks of fighting. This photo shows the Castle Bravo test during Operation Castle, photographed from an aircraft as the cloud rose above Bikini Atoll in 1954. Within minutes, the cloud spread wider than many cities, turning a remote Pacific lagoon into one of the most studied Cold War test sites. In December 1967, Louis Washkansky became the first person to receive a human-to-human heart transplant at Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town. This bedside photo captures a medical turning point when surgery moved from impossible dream to worldwide headline. Dora Bloch was an Israeli passenger on Air France Flight 139, taken to Uganda during the Entebbe hijacking in 1976. She was in a Kampala hospital during the rescue, and her later disappearance made her one of the most haunting names linked to Operation Entebbe. Before the night of the Hurricane Benefit Concert at Madison Square Garden in December 1975, a world boxing champion sat backstage beside one of music's most famous voices. The quiet bench scene joins sport, protest, and folk rock in one frame because the concert raised attention for boxer Reuben Carter's legal case. In 1966, a youth worker played with children in the Gorbals, a Glasgow district known for crowded housing and major redevelopment. The children's smiles stand out against the worn brick walls and rubbish, showing real warmth in one of Scotland's toughest urban streets. In 1867, hunters in India found a boy living in a cave, and his story became one of the most famous so-called wild child cases ever recorded. He never learned clear speech, and many writers later linked his strange life to the legend behind Mowgli from the Jungle Book. On June 17, 1938, a Japanese Type 95 Kurogane scout car got stuck in flood mud in Anhui, China. The flood came after Yellow River dikes were opened, turning roads into traps for vehicles and carts. In 1990, Saudi scientist Ibrahim al-Alim prayed on the ice at the North Pole beside the Soviet icebreaker Rossiya. The scene joins desert clothing, Arctic ice, and Soviet engineering in one rare polar moment. On June 20, 1975, Jaws premiered after months of trouble with its huge mechanical shark, which the crew nicknamed Bruce. Because the model often failed, Steven Spielberg showed less of it, creating the slow suspense that made the film famous. In 1911, Louis Hine photographed Henry Fournier, a young sweeper in a textile factory in Salem, Massachusetts. His small frame beside the long machines helped expose child labor to Americans in a way numbers could not. In 1889, Tancred Dumas photographed two men in the Levant who moved as one team. One could see and one could walk. The portrait is powerful because their daily life depended on trust, balance, and perfect teamwork. In October 1965, Indonesian soldiers detained a man during the political purge that followed the failed September 30th movement. This photo became a stark symbol of how fast a country can change when fear, power, and ideology collide. On September 8, 1923, 7 United States Navy destroyers ran onto the rocks at Honda Point in California. A navigation mistake in heavy coastal fog turned a training run into the Navy's largest peacetime ship loss. In 1944, Long Beach, California, was packed with oil towers rising between roads, tanks, and small buildings. The photo shows how an American beach city once looked more like an industrial forest than a seaside town. On May 3, 1953, Virginia Shao photographed a truck cab hanging from the Pitt River Bridge near Redding, California. Her simple Kodak Brownie photo captured the rescue and won the 1954 Pulitzer Prize for photography. In the 1990s, an Italian soldier stood guard in Sicily during major anti-mafia operations. His Beretta BM-59 shows how old Cold War gear was still used on Italian streets during a tense security era. In 1918, this German dog hospital treated messenger dogs brought back from the First World War front lines. These dogs carried notes through mud and noise, making them small but vital links between soldiers. At Ground Zero. In 2001, firefighters stopped for a moment as thick smoke and dust burned their eyes during the rescue work. The photo became powerful because it shows the human side of that day. Not flames or buildings, but tired faces still staying on duty. In 1952, a United States Navy pilot landed his fighter on the wrong aircraft carrier, and the deck crew turned the mistake into instant comedy. Before sending him back, sailors covered the plane with chalk jokes like "Must be Air Force," making one navigation error famous for decades. In 1912, Josie, Bertha, and Sophia worked as oyster shuckers for the Maggioni Canning Company in Port Royal. Their worn dresses and serious faces helped expose how very young children were used in hard seafood factory work. In 1968, engineers tested a Tupolev 144 model inside a giant wind tunnel at the Central Aerohydrodynamic Institute near Moscow. The tiny person inside the chamber shows the huge scale behind the Soviet race to build a supersonic passenger plane. In 1952, British strongwoman Joan Rhodes bent an iron bar with her teeth during a stage demonstration. Her act mixed theater and real strength, and the 3 men leaning in make the feat look even more unbelievable. In the 1950s or 1960s, Mercury Marine used this floating table boat to show the pulling power of its outboard motor. The strange stunt worked like a perfect ad, turning a simple wooden table into proof that the engine could move almost anything. In 1927, women in Madrid gathered for a long hair contest during the summer Verbena de la Paloma festival. Their hair nearly reached the ground, turning the street into a rare display of beauty, patience, and local pride. In 1988, British Royal Marines in Deal, Kent, raised money for their music school with a deliberately funny street stunt. The white ballet outfit beside strict military posture made the charity scene impossible to ignore. In 1947, Howard Hughes built the giant spruce goose in Long Beach, but the aircraft was made mostly from birch, not spruce. The huge flying boat flew only once, staying in the air for 26 seconds above the water. In 1962, the United States President and Vice President watched live television as the rocket-carrying John Glenn lifted off. Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth, and this small screen moment turned into a national space milestone. In August 1945, former Vichy leader Pierre Laval argued loudly in a Paris courtroom during his treason trial. The raised hands and crowded room show one of post-war France's most dramatic reckonings with collaboration. In 1960, J. Robert Oppenheimer lectured at Kyoto University, filling the blackboard with equations and molecular sketches. The quiet classroom scene shows the physicist far from his wartime fame, teaching science in a country deeply shaped by the atomic age. In 1966, Gimbel's department store warned women that narrow heels could catch in the escalator steps. The photo turns a simple safety rule into a perfect snapshot of mid-century fashion meeting modern machines. In 1905, immigrants detained at Ellis Island danced inside the waiting hall while officials decided who could enter the United States. The accordion, raised hands, and tired faces show a rare human moment inside a place where millions waited between their old life and a new one. In 1916, Quentin Corley drove a car using a special steering device he created after losing both hands. Even more impressive, he also patented the prosthetic arm he used, turning his own problem into a working invention. On November 15, 1952, the Operation Ivy King test rose above Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands with a force of 500 kilotons. It remains the most powerful pure fission device ever tested by the United States, captured here as a glowing cloud above the Pacific. After 6 days walking from Srebrenica in 1995, a Bosnian father reached the United Nations Air Base in Tuzla and reunited with his family. Their faces show the exact moment fear turned into relief after they thought they might never see him again. In 1993, security men in suits watched from a Moscow window during the Russian constitutional crisis. Their hidden uniforms, office setting, and compact rifles show how political power in Russia briefly moved from speeches into guarded rooms and tense corridors. In 1930, Ryu Buntoku arrived in Japan from China with large keratin growths on his head, making him a famous medical curiosity and stage attraction. Doctors said the growths were hardened skin rather than bone, and his rare appearance was later sold through postcards and performances. In 1943 or 1944, Russian Cossack cavalrymen served with German forces in the Second World War, wearing traditional fur hats with German uniforms. The mix of Cossack identity and foreign command makes this portrait a rare image of divided loyalties on the Eastern Front. In October 1909, a crowd gathered in Haiphong, then under French colonial rule in Vietnam, to watch a public punishment by guillotine. The scene shows how colonial power used public squares as theaters of control, with officials, soldiers, and civilians all facing the same wooden frame. Around 1947, the Normandy coast still held broken landing craft and block ships left from the Allied landings. These remains show how the temporary harbors did not vanish after the battle, but stayed on the beach like metal traces of the invasion. On January 5, 1939, the Japanese cruiser Suzuya sat at Kure Naval Port, photographed from the deck of the battleship Fuso. The calm harbor view hides the scale of Japan's naval buildup, with small boats passing below one of its fast, heavy cruisers. On July 12, 1945, Soviet and British commanders met at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, only weeks after the city had fallen. The smiles and medals hide a tense new reality, as the former Allies were already standing inside a divided Europe. On May 28, 1945, Marine Staff Sergeant A.S. Barnacle shaved at a washstand half sunk in floodwater on Okinawa. Heavy monsoon rain had turned the camp into a shallow lake, but daily routine somehow continued in the middle of it. In February 1985, a White House state dinner for Saudi Arabia brought royalty, American politics, and New York high society into one room. The handshake captures a polished diplomatic moment where oil wealth, power, and celebrity all met under the same chandeliers. In 1926, Belgian Princess Marie-José wore an ancient Egyptian-themed outfit at a ball during Europe's huge Egypt craze after Tutankhamun's tomb was found. She later became Queen of Italy for only a few weeks, making this costume photo an unusual glimpse of royalty before a very short reign. Hans Trebst was a German First World War officer who later joined the Turkish national movement during the Greco-Turkish conflict from 1919 to 1923. His three portraits show a man moving between uniforms, borders, and causes in the chaotic years after the old empires fell. In the early 1920s, Joseph Stalin stood with Red Army commander Alexander Yegorov beside a huge military map during the Soviet state's first years. Yegorov later became one of the first marshals of the Soviet Union, making this quiet office photo a strange glimpse of power before it turned inward. On June 8, 1924, George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine prepared for their final climb toward Everest's summit. They never returned, and the missing proof of whether they reached the top first remains one of mountaineering's greatest mysteries. Around 1863, this Civil War drummer boy posed in uniform with his cap in hand, looking far older than his young age. Drummer boys carried rhythm, signals, and camp messages, making them small figures with real duties inside a huge national conflict. On February 20, 1942, a Japanese Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber went down near the United States aircraft carrier Lexington after Grumman Wildcat fighters intercepted the raid. The smoke trail and steep fall capture one frozen second from the early carrier battles of the Pacific War. In March 1989, artist Keith Haring joined an AIDS coalition to unleash power protest at New York City Hall, holding a poster about 10,000 local lives lost. He used his fame and bold street art to turn the health crisis into public pressure and passed away the next February at age 31. In 1949, workers in Astrakhan sat together in the early post-war Soviet years, with a river or industrial post behind them. Their calm faces, headscarves, and work clothes show the quiet strength of people rebuilding daily life after years of hardship. In 1940, two ranch workers ate dinner in a Texas home during the busy goat shearing and kidding season. The plain table, heavy plates, and tired faces show rural work life, when neighbors were often hired hands too. On November 22, 1963, Jacqueline Kennedy kept the same pink suit as she left Dallas beside the new president, Lyndon Johnson. Her decision made the outfit a silent record of one of America's most shocking political moments. On June 21, 1971, archaeologist Boris Mozilevsky found the Scythian gold pectoral in the Tovsta Mohyla burial mound in Ukraine. When the clay was washed away, the 2,400-year-old gold collar revealed tiny animals, riders, and plants, with a gold-decorated sword lying nearby. In May 1989, a student leader spoke to a packed Tiananmen Square in Beijing as thousands listened around her. The small recorder in her hand and the huge crowd behind her show how one voice could carry through a moment, watched by the world. In January 1959, Buddy Holly and Waylon Jennings squeezed into a New York City photo booth, smiling like two young musicians at the edge of fame. Weeks later, Jennings gave up his seat on Holly's tour plane, turning this playful frame into a haunting piece of rock and country history. In September 1950, during the Korean War, a man carried his wife on his back as they fled through Gimhae in South Gyeongsang Province. Their tied bundles and exhausted faces show how ordinary families had to move with only what they could carry when the front lines shifted. In 1911, Joseph Stalin appeared in a Tsarist police file in St. Petersburg, years before he became the leader of the Soviet Union. The three views and handwritten details show him not as a ruler, but as a watched revolutionary moving through the empire's underground world. In 1967, Greek political exiles in Germany protested against the military junta that had taken power in Greece. The banners for amnesty and free elections show how the fight over Greek democracy quickly became visible far beyond Greece itself. In 1941, a Vichy French gendarme saluted a German officer in front of the Arc de Triomphe in occupied Paris. The huge monument and the small exchange make the photo a sharp symbol of France's divided wartime reality. Around 1944, Staff Sergeant Timerlate Kervin and Corporal Samuel J. Love read the papers for their Purple Hearts after the Battle of Saipan. The medals on their shirts and the letter in hand show two Black American Marines being formally recognized during one of the Pacific Campaign's hardest island battles. In 1952, Chinese infantrymen took positions on the steep ground of Triangle Hill during the Korean War. The low hillside and close spacing show why this small piece of land became one of the most fiercely contested points of the front. Around 1910, A German non-commissioned officer of the Schutztruppe posed with an East African woman in German East Africa. The formal uniform beside the relaxed pose shows the human side of a colonial world built on strict rank and unequal power. In 1943, Frank V. McKinless swore in some of the first women Marines in New York as the United States expanded wartime service roles. Their raised hands mark a turning point when women began taking official Marine duties that freed more men for frontline assignments. In 1904, a Korean husband and wife posed in traditional everyday clothing during the final years of the Joseon era. Their calm posture and layered hanbok show a world of strict dress codes, family rank, and quiet formality before modern Korea changed fast. In 1915, a chimpanzee called Little Nap became a tourist attraction while dressed as a tiny Napoleon for staged photos. The costume, sword, and serious pose show how early show business turned animals into strange human-like characters for crowds. In 1925, the Drexel Institute Women's Rifle Team posed with long coats, sharp shoes, and serious confidence. Their calm stance shows how college women were already entering organized marksmanship at a time when public sport was still seen as mostly male. In 1863, photographers Haas and Peel captured the USS New Ironsides firing near Charleston Harbor while people watched from the beach. It is considered one of the earliest known photographs of active combat, showing a Civil War battle as it was still unfolding in the distance. In 1948, the Kataby Colliery Rescue Team posed with breathing gear, lamps, oxygen sets, and medical equipment used for underground mine emergencies. Their heavy packs show how dangerous coal rescue work was, where trained miners entered dark tunnels to save others when air and time were running out. In November 1941, this memorial post recalls Soviet partisan Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya, remembered in the Soviet Union as a symbol of courage under occupation. The photo and red words ask viewers to remember how one young woman became a national wartime legend, not just a name in a textbook. This viral Chernobyl image shows an emergency worker in protective gear, but the claim that radiation turned brown eyes blue is not supported by medical evidence. The real danger after the 1986 reactor accident was invisible exposure, which made cleanup work far more serious than the meme suggests. This wartime photo appears to show a B-24 Liberator in flight, with smoke streaming from one side after heavy damage. The calm shape of the aircraft against the sky makes the scene even more tense, because crews often had to keep flying for miles before finding any chance to land. In 1946, Iva Toguri was photographed at Sugamo Prison after being linked by the press to the wartime radio name Tokyo Rose. Her case became famous because Tokyo Rose was not one single woman, and she was later pardoned after doubts grew over the testimony against her. In 1963, the Kennedy family left the memorial service for President John F. Kennedy in Washington. The children on the steps made the scene unforgettable, turning a national ceremony into a deeply human family moment. This 1917 photo from Cape Scott in Canada became famous because the man in the center looked strangely modern compared with everyone around him. His shirt and shorts were actually possible for the time, but his relaxed pose still makes the so-called surfer guy look like he stepped into the wrong century. In 1917, this armored vehicle rolled through damaged streets in Kronstadt during the Russian Revolutionary period. The soldiers packed on top and broken buildings around them make the scene feel less like a normal arrest and more like a city where order had suddenly changed hands. In 1918, a German tank moved through the damaged streets of Roye, France, during the final year of the First World War. The soldiers riding on top and the shattered buildings around them show how new armored machines entered towns already changed by years of fighting. Around 1900, this Anti-Vaccination League photo shows families posing under a banner that framed vaccines as a question of personal liberty. The image proves that vaccine fear is not a modern invention, but a debate that has followed public health for more than a century. In March 1969, an Apollo astronaut stood in his Texas backyard with his wife, children, dog, and a simple swing set. Just months before the moon mission, the photo shows space history paused inside an ordinary family afternoon. In March 1945, Private Raymond Roth was photographed near Remscheid, Germany, after hard fighting close to the Siegfried Line. The mud on his uniform and the look in his eyes show the physical cost of pushing through the last fortified belt before Germany's collapse. In 1941, German Colonel General Eugen von Schobert sat with staff officers in an Eastern Front village during the first months of the invasion of the Soviet Union. The field radio, papers, and wooden wall make the scene look calm, but it was part of a fast-moving command network behind the front lines. In 1941, German soldiers on Crete staged a mock night tournament while riding donkeys, with local children watching from the roadside. The playful scene looks almost unreal because it happened on an island still living under wartime occupation. In August 1977, Elvis Presley's funeral procession moved down Elvis Presley Boulevard in Memphis as crowds lined the road. The long row of white cars and silent spectators shows how a singer's death turned an ordinary street into a national farewell. On May 24, 1988, TACA Flight 110 landed safely on a grass levee near New Orleans after both engines lost power in a storm. The Boeing 737 was later repaired and flown out from a nearby road, making this one of aviation's most unusual emergency landings. In 1945, President Harry S. Truman rode through Berlin while the city still stood in ruins after the Second World War. The open car, military escort, and broken buildings show a new American president seeing the destroyed capital just before post-war Europe was reshaped. In 1972, former Japanese Sergeant Shoichi Yokoi was found in the jungles of Guam after living hidden there for 28 years. He had survived in a handmade shelter with simple tools, becoming one of the most astonishing holdouts from the Second World War. In May 1945, soldiers of Easy Company rested on a terrace in the Bavarian Alps after reaching the Berghof, the mountain retreat of Nazi Germany's leader. The later signatures turned the quiet mountain scene into a personal artifact from one of the most famous airborne units of the war. In 1964, two St. Louis Cardinals players quietly held hands during the official team photo as a joke. The team fined them and later retook the picture, turning one small prank into a famous baseball clubhouse story. In 1956, Hamburg shipyard worker Karl Ergel posed with tattoos by Herbert Hoffman, one of the best-known tattoo artists of the St. Pauli district. His full-body designs show how tattoo culture lived in ports, workshops, and sailor neighborhoods long before it became mainstream fashion. In 1974, a famous American singer rode through the Houston Astrodome in a red Ford Bronco while greeting a massive crowd. The white stage suit, indoor stadium, and open vehicle made the entrance feel more like a royal parade than a concert arrival. In the 1950s, workers used cranes to raise fallen Stonehenge stones that had been lying out of place since the 18th century. The photo surprises many people because it shows the ancient monument was partly rebuilt with modern machines, not simply left untouched for thousands of years. In 1984, an Amsterdam police officer gave a punk girl a light during a protest in the city center. The photo stands out because two people from opposite sides of the street scene share one oddly calm moment in the middle of public tension. In April 1945, injured soldiers were moved by dog sled near the Seelow Heights as Soviet forces pushed into eastern Germany. The ruined streets and improvised sleds show how even animals became part of the last desperate transport lines before Berlin. In 1936, Italian troops in Ethiopia were photographed using chemical agents during the invasion, despite official denials from the fascist government. The grainy image is powerful because it shows evidence from a war where modern weapons were used far from Europe's main spotlight. On April 18, 1945, a Japanese Fugo paper balloon was found near Point Roberts after drifting across the Pacific to North America. These wind-carried balloons were one of the strangest long-range attacks of the Second World War, using the jet stream like an invisible highway. A worker hangs by ropes while carving Abraham Lincoln's face into Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills of South Dakota. The tiny figure beside the giant stone nose shows how the monument was shaped by dangerous handwork, not just machines. On April 13, 1918, British Lewis gunners guarded a bridge over the Lys Canal at Marquois during the Battle of the Lys. The wooden barricade, canal crossing, and quiet houses show how a small village bridge became a key point in the final year of the First World War. In May 1945, a Soviet Joseph Stalin II tank stood in front of the damaged Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. The broken monument and massive tank show the exact moment when the center of Nazi power had fallen into ruins. During the First World War, Austro-Hungarian soldiers dug trenches in deep snow to hold their position through winter. The frozen ground, heavy coats, and simple tools show how survival could be as difficult as the battle itself. In 1945, British Ambulance Corps members arrived in London after a V-2 rocket impact, when rescue teams had to work with almost no warning time. The scene shows the speed of wartime emergency work, where every minute mattered after one of the world's first long-range missiles reached the city. In the 1890s, workers in Chicago produced iron ingots during the city's rise as a major industrial center. The glowing metal, heavy molds, and factory heat show the raw foundation behind America's bridges, railroads, and tall buildings. Sandy Allen was known as the world's tallest woman during her lifetime, and her height was linked to a pituitary gland condition. She used her fame to visit schools, speak kindly about difference, and support people facing similar medical challenges. On the North African front, British soldiers turned the tail section of a captured Luftwaffe Messerschmitt Bf-110 into an improvised bar. The rudders became a strange backdrop for a drink, showing how battlefield scraps were sometimes reused for brief moments of relief. In early 1917, the 4 daughters of Tsar Nicholas II lost their hair after catching measles during the First World War. Their shaved heads made the imperial sisters look almost unrecognizable just months before the Russian monarchy collapsed. After the Second World War, rows of Vought F-4U Corsairs were stored at the Rukuhia Aircraft Boneyard in New Zealand. The field became a graveyard for once powerful Pacific fighters, with many aircraft later stripped for parts or scrapped. On July 30, 1942, 14-year-old Pyotr Ustinovich Gurko received the Medal for Courage in the Pskov-Novgorod partisan zone. The small boy beside armed adults shows how the Eastern Front pulled even children into dangerous resistance work. On January 10, 1949, Lieutenant General Du Yuming was taken prisoner after his large nationalist force collapsed in the Huaihai campaign. His capture marked a major turning point in the Chinese Civil War, as dozens of divisions disappeared from the nationalist order of battle. In 1932, workers in Leningrad shaped felt boots inside the Felter Artel workshop, turning wool into warm winter footwear by hand. The heavy tables, wet felt, and focused faces show how simple Valenki were made through skill, pressure, and long physical work. In May 1929, women from Berlin's night scene were photographed buying illegal stimulants from a street seller known by the nickname Coke Emile. The image captures the hidden side of Weimar Berlin, where bright nightlife, poverty, and underground trade shared the same streets. In March 1942, a Japanese sentry from the 77th Infantry Brigade stood guard among debris in Bacolod, Philippines. His Arisaka rifle and lonely post show how quickly a city street could become a military checkpoint during the Pacific Campaign. In December 1942, Soviet sniper Vasily Zaitsev of the 284th Rifle Division moved through the ruins of Stalingrad with the students he had trained. The photo captures the city war that made him famous, where broken walls, rubble, and patience turned ruined streets into a deadly chessboard.